Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Jordan Wilson, the host of the Everyday AI podcast and newsletter, and the founder and CEO of the Accelerant Agency.
My name's Jordan Wilson, the founder and host of Everyday AI. It's an AI media company, but we're a daily podcast, live stream, newsletter, creating courses, community, all of that stuff. We've been doing that for about 9 months now, doing it every single day, just educating technically now hundreds of thousands of people on generative AI. So I have that, but I also have my own digital strategy company called Accelerant Agency that I've been running now for about 5 years. So that's kind of at least who I am today. You know, I'm a MarTech background geek who just Gen AIs all day, every day.
Awesome. And I know you have a really interesting background before you got to where you are now. Journalists are so important to our society. And so take us back to college or high school and talk to us about your journey, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. I can go back a while. So yeah, even before I was a journalist, I was delivering the news, right? So I started as a paper boy when I was like, 12. And then I, worked some random, little part-time jobs when I was in high school. I started working, pretty young, 14. I think I was 14 years old. And then actually what happened is me and my brother both worked at Culver's, right? I love Culver's, by the way. Some of the best fast food ever. So anyways, I was reading the newspaper during my break at Culver's and I saw this, ad in the newspaper for a job writing for the newspaper, my hometown paper called the Freeport Journal-Standard. So I applied for the job, didn't get it, but I did get a call back from them a couple weeks later and they're like, hey, we have a different job. Do you want it? I said, sure. So I went and took it. So instead of writing, the job application was essentially being a freelance writer for the newspaper covering sports. So instead, I got to help, design the newspaper, put together the sports stats, etc. And come to find out, which I didn't know, it was maybe my first week there, and the editor goes, "Hey, like, do you have a brother?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why?" And he's like, "Oh, I think we hired your brother for the job that you applied for." And I'm like, "Oh, what?" So my brother didn't tell me. And, he wasn't living, we weren't living in the same house at the same time because he was, 19 or 20. So it became this very competitive thing for me. So I just really wanted to become a better writer because, I was always competitive with my brother. And even though, I was working at the newspaper, I wanted to write, I wanted to have my name in the newspaper. So that's actually how the whole, journalism thing started, is just by being an overly competitive younger brother. And that just grew, my love of writing and exploring and ultimately asking questions, which I think what's, probably led to, me wanting to do a daily podcast is I'm just naturally curious. I like to learn new things and I like to simplify things as well.
Wow. And I was a photojournalist for my high school newspaper. And I think I might have written some articles when I was younger as well. So I can appreciate that, right? So and so did you so then after that, did you just stay working there? Or did you go to college or
Yeah. So I worked at that newspaper for started my junior year, I think, of high school. So I worked there for about 2.5 years. And then I went to college. I worked at the daily, it was a daily newspaper at the college I went to. And so that was just kind of my transition, right? Because before I even started working in the newspaper, I really didn't even know what I wanted to do. To tell you the truth, I wasn't even necessarily thinking seriously about college, at least in, my small hometown. It's not something, where every kind of kid goes to college. So that actually, was really great for me. And it really just kind of paved my future, being able to learn how to write. And, people said, hey, you're a good writer. You should do this in school. And so that's kind of, paved my way through both, undergraduate and graduate school, just being involved in journalism and, public affairs reporting, et cetera. So yeah, that's what kind of transitioned me to my early professional career.
got it? And then so when you graduated college, you were at a newspaper for a bunch of years, or how did that work?
No, yeah, it's funny. I kind of retired from journalism at like age 23. Because I started when I was like 16 or 17. So I was literally working for a daily newspaper I think that entire time. So for like 7 or 8 years, right? So most recently, it's like a year-long program at the Chicago Sun-Times as part of my grad school. So I kind of just stopped after that. I kept writing freelance, but at age 23, I was kind of not disheartened, but I was always I feel um, just frustrated with just the industry in general, right? I was always pushing like, oh, let's do this for the web, or let's do video, let's do audio slideshows. Like, I feel I was always pushing to do new things because at the time, kind of, I wouldn't call it like Web 2.0, but I would say information on the web in the early mid 2000s, it was a new thing and no one knew how to deal with it. And I feel I was always pushing very hard, and I just feel I always got pushback. So at that point, I was kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to stop this like daily newspaper thing and kind of reassess and see how I can use these same skills and still make an impact maybe in a different industry.
Got it. And so you went to the MarTech, the advertising or the marketing firm, or what was that?
Yeah, yeah. So it's weird. So it was actually a nonprofit. So I started, doing marketing for a nonprofit, but in essence, we became a marketing and activation agency for Nike and Jordan brands. So I did work at that nonprofit for almost 10 years. And I'd say for the last 5 or 6, about 90% of my job was working on pretty large scale partnerships with Nike and Jordan brands. So we would go activate with them, across the country. So, a lot here in Chicago where I live, but we would do events and activations with them in, New York City, in, out at their headquarters in Oregon and LA, all over the place. So yeah, we really just became an activation agency for Nike and Jordan brand, in the latter part of my decade
That's incredible. So did you become a sneakerhead, or you were sort of a Nike
there.
aficionado, or what?
Unintentionally, right? Like, people always like see all the shoes I wear and they're like, "Oh, wow, like you have expensive taste." And I'm like, "I haven't bought a single pair of them," right? Like, there'd be times, it's like, which was very cool. And I like still have, good connections I keep in touch with, at Nike and Jordan brand. But it was so cool because, I'd show up in, New York City, I go in my hotel room, and there's just clothes like waiting for me, multiple pairs of shoes, and they have my sizes. And yeah, so people always just assume like, oh, you're big into fashion, because I'd get all these, Nike clothes that they didn't always release and all these cool shoes. And I'm like, no, like, they just take care of us because we're out there, kind of representing their brand in different places. But yeah, decent sneaker collection. But hey, that's fine. My name's Jordan, so I love having more Jordans than I can count.
Exactly. Oh my God. That's so awesome. That's so awesome. All right. So now let's bring us up to date. You are a leader in educating folks about AI, and I love your show. Um, I've been on the show, but really I
Yeah.
love learning from the show more importantly. And it's really something you're so passionate about. And I really respect that. So talk to us about how did that start? And, take us through some things you've learned just from doing a podcast and a newsletter. And then we'll get into, everything related to AI because there's so much and we have so much to get to.
Yeah. So I'd say it started probably in about, well, if I'm being honest, it started before I started my business, right? So I started my main company, Accelerant Agency, I believe in 2018. So when I wrote my business plan in 2017, right before I started my company, I wrote down that I was going to do this kind of quote unquote traditional, digital strategy and marketing work for 3 to 5 years. And then I said in my business plan that I believed that something was going to come along that changed, or devalued the work of marketers, of advertisers. I didn't know what it was, but I said, hey, I'm going to invest, hopefully save up some money in the company so then I can, create something new whenever this happens. Right. I had no clue what it was going to be at the time, but I'd say in about 2020, I started to realize what that was. And I started to realize it was Gen AI. That's about the time that GPT-3 became publicly available, right? So there was no Chat GPT. It was all through other, commercial products. I think some of the first ones that we used in late 2020 when GPT first came out were like Copy AI. Jarvis. I think there was one called Headline or Headline, right? So there's all these different tools. And as a writer, as a former journalist, the first iterations of generative AI, as we call it today, were writing tools. Um, and I was shocked, right? I was shocked because to see that in action as someone that's, I can do the math, but I'm sure I've had somewhere between 500,000 and a million words or more published, probably even more than that. Um, but I was shocked at how good this technology was and how fast it was and how accurate it could be and how you could interact with it to increase the outputs. So, as a dork, right? Like I've been a dork my whole life. In high school, I became like a Microsoft certified professional. I was building computers. So I've always been a dork. So when it was kind of like a coming together of two different like passions or backgrounds of mine, right? Like this writing and kind of this technology. And I was enamored. So it was during that time I tried to start learning what generative AI is, and these other technologies were starting to slowly pop up, and I found it hard. There wasn't a lot out there at the time because I feel every other resource was either you had to take a course from like an MIT, or maybe like IBM had something, but at the time it was all extremely technical. And there were great podcasts and there were some newsletters, but everything was for like, if I'm being honest, it felt like you had to have a PhD in machine learning to understand any of it. So here I was for a good year and a half, I'll say 21 to early 2022, where it's just like I'm trying to learn everything, and it was so hard. It was so time consuming, and I spent so much time trying to take this complicated machine learning, deep learning, like speak and to understand it, right? And I finally said, and it was probably right when ChatGPT came out, there was so much terrible information. People were just wrong. Everyone like was just giving out terrible information. And like coming from me, I've been getting paid now to write for 20 years. And I'd been using the GPT technology, from about 2 years when ChatGPT came out. And I'm like, wait, this is wrong. Like everyone is doing this incorrectly. And people were just rushing to, sell things. And I'm like, no, like I truly felt that this technology is a generational type technology, right? It's something that we don't see probably more than once in our lifetime. I think, the smartest people in the world say that, you can't compare generative AI or AI to the internet or to computers. It's completely different, right? I think the Google CEO said it's going to be more impactful than fire and electricity. And I would believe that. So that's kind of the very long story of how we kind of got to where we are today, with now doing this every single day, and just consuming generative AI content like it's water, because I drink a lot.
Yeah, no. Um, that makes so much sense. And again, thank you for doing it. So let's talk about everything is changing so quickly, as I hear every day on your show. There's so many opportunities, but there's also challenges. So let's, bring us up to date on the opportunities. How are you seeing things? And then we can get to the challenges related to generative AI.
Yeah. Opportunities are time. I really press time. Um, because you can think of AI, like generative AI implementation, and people always think big. It's not like that. You have to think first, where's the low hanging fruit? Where can you get back time, right? I think that's people are always trying to, find ways to push revenue or to reduce staffing costs. Um, I tell people win back time. That's one of the things I push very hard, and I try to help so many people do. I had a consulting call with a woman yesterday. We had a 90-minute call, and at the end, she's like, this is wild. Like this is going to save me so much time. That is the most, I think, when you're looking at generative AI, it's hard, it's distracting. And you think like, oh, I'm going to double my business, or, oh, we're going to grow, we're going to do this. And yes, that's great. Those things take time. So you have to win back time now, right? If you really want to like benefit from this technology.
Got it. Okay, so time, and I know I've heard different, suggestions. Just play with it. Number one is to get up to speed, right? Some people, experts, have said at least 10 hours. You have to try it for at least 10 hours to get some traction and know how it works. Well, how do you feel about that? I mean, there's people who haven't started yet trying it at all. They've heard all this buzz, and there's some people who have played with it a little bit. There's some people on the other end of the spectrum, like you, thousands of hours. What's your sort of guidance for people to, come up to speed or stay up to speed?
Um, you have to make decisions about how you've always gone about your daily life and preparing yourself for the future. Um, so I tell a lot of people, like people are like, oh, I'm not sure, how I can make this work for me. And I say, well, start with your personal life, right? Because depending on how people, like how their companies are structured, they might not be able to use generative AI, right? I just did a free, I do free prompting courses all the time. And so many people, even yesterday, are like, man, I wish I could use this at my job, but they block it, right? I can't do this. So I say, okay, use it in your personal life then, because there's going to be a point at some point soon, your company will have no choice but to allow it, right? For those companies that I still think, if I'm being honest, there's always exceptions to the rule, but I think some companies are just being stubborn because they don't understand it, but they're blocking it. So if that is you, if you don't have the ability right now to use generative AI in your work, use it for your personal life, right? All of the big companies, all of the big products have pretty decent free offerings, right? You can download a free Chat GPT app. You can now download a free Gemini app. If Google's new model, if you have an Android, there's a dedicated Gemini app. If you have an iPhone, the Google app now has Gemini capabilities. Copilot from Microsoft, right? Put those on your home screen on your phone. Start using them, right? Instead of doing Google search, use the Google app and use Gemini, make Gemini the default, or start using ChatGPT as your search, right? So I think when people start to see personal productivity gains or personal gains just in other aspects of their non-work life, then they start to rewire their brain differently, right? Because how we live our personal life, I think greatly impacts how we go about our professional life, because that's how we're wired, right? So if you start to not just think of generative AI as something you have to do to keep up in your business, in your company, in your career, and instead start putting it to work for you in your personal life, I think your outlook changes.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Um, and right now there's parity amongst those different ones, or how are we seeing sort of, for most people, it's parity, right?
Yeah, there's parity on paper, I guess, right? Yeah, different. Yeah, depending on what you ultimately need to do, you need to accomplish with generative AI. In theory, there's a lot of different options, that you can go to accomplish different things. I obviously have uh, very hot takes on, whether some tools are even worth using or not. But yeah, there's definitely a wide variety of different avenues that you can go in the generative AI. It's not like, oh, there's only one thing that works for everything. It's not like that. It depends on how you work. It depends on what type of work you do or what you want to do, personally by using Gen AI. But yeah, I think there's plenty of options.
Got it. So let's talk about that. Two other areas, creativity, right? I know I use it to jumpstart, things in my head and on paper. That's one. And then let's talk about video creation or image creation. There's so much going on. So bring us up to date on that. How do you view creativity and generative AI?
People aren't going to like me for this. AI is more creative than humans. AI is more creative than at least the one single most creative human, because creativity is derivative, right? There's nothing right now that you and I can say or do in terms of being creative that has not already, in some shape or form, already existed, right? Like it is literally not possible. So my thought is creativity is derivative, right? You're always drawing inspiration. Even if you're doing something that's completely new and fresh, you are still drawing, inspiration from other people who have done something before. So therefore, my thought is creativity is fact-based, right? So if you can, even if you're just saying like, oh, using a large language model, yeah, you can't just go in and say, give me the 10 most creative ideas ever. Like, yeah, that's not going to work, right? But if you know how to properly use a large language model, if you know how to properly train it, if you know how to properly share information, if you keep memory in mind, and if you teach a certain chat, what it means in your lens to be creative, absolutely. Like generative AI is way more creative than any single human being. And I've like talked a little bit about my background. I've created creative, right? Or I've produced creative for Nike, for Jordan brand, for so many big brands. So I'm not coming at this from a point like, oh, I'm a novice, I'm a journalist. No, I was a multimedia journalist. I've created photos, videos, things that those organizations had never done before from a creativity standpoint. So I also want to give that background there. But yeah, I mean, even when we start looking at the AI image generators, now I've been saying this for a while, the AI video generators are going to be huge. I think the thing to look at, aside from saying like, oh, having the argument, is AI actually creative, right? But it brings creativity to everyone, right? Which before creativity, I think was such a unique skill. It's kind of sad, being someone that used to spend a lot of time, designing websites or, taking photos, right? But now anyone, if you have control of language, you can put in a simple prompt or see other people's prompts and go in and tweak them on your own and put them in a program like Midjourney, or put them in a program like Runway, and all of a sudden someone that had zero creativity or a very low level of creativity, now all of a sudden you can look at them and say, this is amazing, right? I think you've already seen some of the most, people on social media that have really taken off in this kind of AI creativity space have said themselves, before this, I was not a creative, right? A lot of people, similar like myself, people who have maybe writing backgrounds, and maybe they were creative in their writing, but that was kind of the end of where their creativity lied. So yeah, now it just opens up so many new avenues, so many new streams, so many new verticals for how someone with maybe lower levels of creativity can all of a sudden excel in terms of what they are able to creatively produce with generative AI.
Right. So you talk about prompting, right? Make us or give us an update on what that is, number one, for folks who may not know what prompting is, and how it's progressed
Sure.
since the beginning.
Sure. So I'll do my best to illustrate this, So if you think of three boxes stacked on top of each other, right? And then think the one on the top and the one on the bottom are see-through. All right. So if we go top to bottom, we have see-through box, and then we have black box in the middle, and then we have see-through box on the bottom. All right. So this is essentially how generative AI and prompting works. All right. In the top box, that is where your prompts go. That is your input, right? So a prompt can technically be, yes, text. It can be, long text, short text, etc. But a prompt, in theory, can also be an image. It can be your voice. It can be a video, right? So as we talk about multimodality in generative AI, so a prompt is essentially anything that you can input, so text, video, speech, photo, etc., into that black box, which is generative AI, right? And that's what when you talk about explainability within generative AI, no one truly, I mean, not no one, but very few people understand what goes on in that middle box, that black box, right? But then it spits out outputs, right? So those outputs are usually 10, 100, 1,000 times greater than the inputs that were put into that magical black box. So that's the way that I like to explain what a prompt is, because people try to get very caught up, and I like to keep it simple. A prompt is just any form of, text or photo or image or voice that you put into a generative AI system. And then that generative AI system works its magic through deep learning and machine learning and spits out something probably much more impactful, much more creative, much more beautiful than maybe that simple prompt that was put into the box.
Got it. Okay. So some have said that prompting is going to change going forward. We might not have to be as thoughtful or as creative as we have in the past. How do you view that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's the answer is always changing, right? Because what we don't know today is how all of these large, trillion-dollar companies who create these generative AI systems, how they're going to change how they work, right? So I'd say the easiest way to look at this is Midjourney. So, I think it's one of the most popular generative AI systems out there. I think from a quality standpoint, it is by far the best AI image generator out there, right? So if you look at, Midjourney as an example, V3 or V4, right? We're on V6 now. When you're talking V4, your prompts were very important, right? You had to almost be able to speak Midjourney, right? It was almost its own language. Because if you didn't kind of speak the prompt language exactly how you needed to, your output would not be that good, right? But now when we look at V6, the prompt handling has changed drastically. So you don't necessarily have to speak it as well. At least if we say, like, I always say, like, pass fail, right? Are you above the bar or not, right? So in earlier versions of Midjourney and other generative AI systems, you kind of had to like have some stronger prompting skills to at least get over that pass grade, right? Now, not so much, right? Obviously, you can get over that bar much easier without having to be able to speak Midjourney speak. But obviously, if you're able to speak it, you can go much higher and above the bar. But to be able to get something that is, I will say, above average is much, much simpler now in most generative AI systems because these companies are making that kind of like natural language processing a little more flexible and a little easier that we can put, a little bit more jumbled information into that black box and it'll still understand it a little better.
Got it. Okay. So you spoke about Midjourney. Tell us all about all this video creation, image creation. Where are we now, right? It's just getting so much better. What are you excited about?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm excited for 2 days. It's who knows when people are going to be hearing this, but anyways, the Super Bowl's in 2 days, right? I'm excited because there's already rumors that at least one or two companies are using AI video in their commercial, right? Which is a pretty big deal, like for the industry in general. So where do I feel with AI video in general? Well, it's moving fast. And the way to look at this is to see who's throwing both money and their name in the ring, right? Because at this time a year ago, all the big tech companies had money, right? They had money in it. Runway was probably one of the biggest players, and they have been, I think, the kind of in the same way that Midjourney is kind of the leader for the AI image space. Runway, I think, has been the leader overall for the kind of AI video space. And, they had a lot of investments from all these large companies, but now these large companies are also throwing their hat into the ring, which tells you something, right? So Meta has their, Emu video that they've, recently announced. Same thing, Google has their Lumiere AI model, which they just announced. So, you are starting to see now these large companies, and I'm sure at some point we will see something from either OpenAI or Microsoft as well. But you are seeing the big companies getting into the AI video space because it is in the same way that I think most people had that oh wow moment when they got a text to text output from ChatGPT. Anyone who works in the creative space and who can now use this technology, that wow saves you way more time, right? Like I've spent a lot of time editing and creating video, in my previous roles, both in journalism and working, at the nonprofit. But the quality it's mind-boggling, right? And just the time, right? So if I use as an example Chat GPT and can spit out a pretty good blog post, let's just say, well, okay, well, maybe that blog post, would have taken someone 5 to 10 hours, right? If you really know what you're doing in AI video programs, right? Especially if you increase the quality of the input by, instead of going text to video, if you start photo to video, right? So if you go photo to video, now you're seeing these kind of like short stories, very cinematic, all AI generated. And if you look at the time savings on something like that, and again, these are technically very primitive models when it comes to AI models. It's like you're not looking at, in theory, like a 5 to 10 hour savings. You're looking at a 500 hour, 5,000 hour, right? Because the budget and the time required to put together, like, oh, this looks like it's, some new version of Star Wars, right? And the visuals are amazing. Like 3 years ago, you couldn't do that without $1 million budget, right? Like that's why you even have, the director of Marvel, I think it was, it says, yeah, we're going to be seeing pretty soon full length AI generated movies that will be pretty high quality, right? That's where it goes with the AI video. That's why I get excited about it, because it goes beyond just the time and the compounding impact of generative AI in that tiny black box. I think snowballs like bigger than our minds can comprehend.
Got it. Okay. So so things are getting better, faster all the time, right? Um, it's just amazing. It's just amazing what we're seeing. Are there any companies that we haven't heard about that you're aware of, right? We hear about all the big names, as you just mentioned. Um, what are some companies that are in that space, image, video space that really are fascinating to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've talked about most of them. Like Pika Labs is a good player in the AI video space. They're a little newer on the scene. They were just kind of little, I wouldn't say late to the party, because they were, kind of like the third or fourth big company. But I do think that they're going to make some splash in the space. Even the you have in the photo space, you have your I think Amazon has their model called Titan. I'd be, oh gosh, I haven't even talked about Adobe, right? Like Adobe's huge in the space, right? Adobe Firefly, they great things there. If I'm being honest, I don't use Adobe's products as much as a lot of these others. Maybe that's just my own, personal. It's like, I grew up using Adobe, and they were a little later, I think, to the Gen AI party than everyone else. They have, I think, taken a little bit more responsible of an approach to it. So it is something that I think myself and companies should be doing. So at least in the photo video space, I'd say, we've kind of covered a lot of them. One I am excited about in just the creativity space, or the media space, I think is Suno. So Suno is a smaller company, and they're amazing. They're amazing. It's essentially text to song, right? And it's not just text to music or text to lyrics. It is literally text to song, and it's actually really good. So yeah, there's just going to be all of these new kind of categories of multimedia creativity popping up that I think is really exciting. It's exciting for both big businesses and for small businesses because there's so many different ways that you can leverage this technology.
Yeah, 100%. Super exciting. Okay, so let's move on to challenges. We just talked about a lot of the opportunities. What are you concerned about?
Education. Yeah, education's huge. I think it's like a gold rush, right? Everyone thinks that, oh, if I can just do this faster, we're going to get rich. Or, oh, if we can just, use this new tool, we're going to triple our revenue. But there's no education, right? If it's a gold rush, it's like we're sending people out without mining equipment, without pickaxes, right? Like we're just sending them out there to figure it out for themselves, right? I think there is such a lack of education and training. It's almost mind-boggling, right? Like I'm not gonna call out like names, but I talk to, like, we do this free the free prompting course, usually multiple times a week, and it's live, right? And I am shocked, like I am literally shocked at the individuals from big companies that come to the prompting course. And I'm like, Like, why are you here? Right? Like, I am talking, I haven't like checked off every single company, but I will say any tech company that's, doing $100 billion at least one of their employees has been to our training. And to me, that's baffling. And I have talked to a lot of leaders, kind of like off the record, and they're like, yo, like our company is not training us top to bottom. So I think so, like the focus right now, it is building and it is money, and no one is worried or focused on education and training, because I think most times people would say, we'll just kind of push training to the back seat, because if we can just be the first with this, or if we can be the best with this new technology and capture market share, the training and education of our employees won't be that much important if we're first, right? And there's so much of this is driven by the stock market, right? Like everyone's, there's so much, if you look, there's all these studies on like investor calls, right? And how much now people are just saying the word AI and Gen AI, and there's like direct correlation to what companies talk about, and what they're actually working on, and like what their stock is doing, right? Like there's a reason why Apple, compared to other huge companies, your Google, your Microsoft, your Amazon, et cetera, Apple's market cap has been, it's obviously going up, but when you like look at all of the other big tech giants, it's not going up as much, because they haven't like officially unveiled their first big AI offering when everyone else has, right? So they're seeing this, over 6 months, I think it's like 20% growth, whereas a lot of their competitors are at like 50, 60, 70% growth over the course of 6 months, which is unheard of because it is a gold rush. So I think companies, big and small, are only focused on growing and money, and they're not focused on education and training.
Got it. And what about the concerns about bias, uh, ethical concerns, misinformation, deepfakes, ransomware, things like that? Is that something that you can expand on?
It's scary, right? It's scary. I think news just came out today, that, like, as an example, Midjourney is considering kind of banning. I don't know if it's permanent or temporary or how this will work, but with political images, right? Which I think would be great, right? Because the last thing we need is very real looking fake images of, as an example, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. The last thing we need is millions of these images that look extremely real circulating on social media before a very important election. So I think deepfakes are going to be a huge issue. I've been saying that for a very long time. So yeah, I mean, the misinformation, the deepfakes, ethical bias, it's all problematic. It's all problematic. And I think that just goes to, everyone, it's everyone, like, I think the big companies have this FOMO, right? They have the FOMO where they're more concerned about building faster, being the first. They're maybe not taking it slow enough. And not all big companies. I think some companies are maybe doing it a little more responsibly than others, but I can't blame them, right? Like, luckily, I'm not the CEO of a $1 trillion company, because I can only imagine the stakeholder pressure, the internal pressure, where it's like, oh, we can't spend 6 months going over biases on these models. Like, we have to get it out because X company is coming out with theirs. And if we don't put ours out now, analysts are expecting that we need to make a big play in this space. So it's like, I can't understand the pressures, but what does happen, unfortunately, is some of those issues just become more commonplace and more prevalent. The deep fakes, the misinformation, the bias, the stereotypes, those just make it out into the wild.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, what about your forecast, for this year? What are you looking forward to? I know you just said you're a little concerned about the election. I think we all are. Uh, what about what are you seeing? What's coming up this year that you're excited about, or that can change everything, or that can really impact uh, society and business?
Yeah. Maybe I'll start with some of the grim stuff and then maybe pump a little optimism. But yeah, I think unfortunately we've already started to see it in the early part of 2024. AI is going to take away a lot of jobs, period. Um, it irks me that more people aren't having open conversations about this because it's the ethical thing to do. People always say, "Oh, well, yeah, AI will, replace jobs, but it'll create just as." No, it won't. It's not going to create as many jobs. Will there be new industries? Yes. Will AI create jobs in 5 years that don't exist next year? Absolutely, they will. But I think job loss is going to be something that is going to be very problematic, right? We've already seen, like I said, early in 2024, there's been tens of thousands of layoffs at big tech. But what's also happening at big tech, they're investing hundreds of millions or billions or tens of billions in some cases in both resources and money in artificial intelligence. So, saying this for more than a year. Look where the money's going and look what's happening at the big companies, right? So that's one thing, right? So I'm not looking forward to that. But what I am looking forward to when it comes to 2024 is generative AI being more and more accessible, right? So we kind of alluded to that, the concept of prompt handling, and it's improving in all of these systems. So I think what's going to happen and what we're going to see is, I think there's a lot of promise and opportunity for small businesses. I think there's a lot of promise and opportunity for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, right? Because now it's becoming easier and easier, and the learning curve is becoming less steep and easier to overcome. That a lot of small companies, I think, are going to be able to leverage generative AI, right? They have to be able to get governance in place. They have to be able to, make the investments to train and educate their employees. But I think it's going to be a weird time where we're going to be seeing a lot of job loss, a lot of uncertainty. Yet at the same time, I do think it's going to actually fuel growth for small and medium sized businesses, right? Who maybe aren't public companies, or who maybe don't have such external pressure, and maybe those obviously not building artificial intelligence, but those who are actually able to use it to grow their company, to grow their career. So yeah, I do see this kind of dichotomy of a range of things happening in 2024. But I think as much I'm not even going to say pessimist, like being the pessimist in me. That's being a realist. There's going to be a lot of AI job loss, right? Like OpenAI just reportedly is working on now, and we'll probably be hearing it officially, autonomous agents, right? Agents that can take over your device, not like in a mean, like, oh, the robots are taking over, but you give them access, right, to take over your device, and then they perform actions for you, right? That's always been the long goal, but reporting just came out on that. So, I mean, that's going to cause a lot of job loss, but at the same time, that will eventually, I think, really give a boost to those companies that are more agile and don't have so much red tape in place, that they can take advantage of generative AI swiftly yet responsibly.
Got it. Now, what about for normal folks, right? You mentioned before to start using it, right, in different ways. Some have said it's worth getting the subscription, regardless of the provider, to get the higher level access. What's your take on that in general?
Yeah, you have to. You have to. If like, I'll at least talk about, like, the big players. I'll just talk about ChatGPT. That's the easiest one, right? So I tell people the only similarity between the free version of ChatGPT and the paid version. So I use an analogy, right? So the similarity there is like how a rotary phone and the newest iPhone can both make a phone call. That is it, right? So if you're trying to get something out of a free version, or if maybe you're judging maybe your company's future investment in a generative AI technology on a rotary phone, on the rotary phone version, when you have the iPhone right there, the iPhone that can, run your life, automate your business, you can have any app in there. You can literally run a company and your whole life just on a phone, right? And you can do similarly the same thing when you have like the paid version of Chat GPT. So yeah, I'd say fortunately, unfortunately, but I do know that there's a cost barrier, right? Not everyone can, say, oh, I'm going to use these 10 tools, and they're all between $10 and $30 a month. I get that not everyone can do that. I understand. But when you think about what is your time worth, right? What are you doing right now in your day to day, and how much does that take you? And then all of a sudden, when you look at a $10 subscription a month to this, or a $20 subscription to this, or a $30, right? Like when I say win back your time, I always talk to people that we're advising, what's your time worth, right? Not just like on the books, what's your hourly rate or what's your hourly wage, but also is what is your time worth? What would you do with more time? So if you start to look at it like that, I think all of a sudden, those $20 a month, it's like, all right, well, that's one less cup of coffee, a week. And all of a sudden, look at the new capabilities you have with a smartphone that you didn't have with a rotary phone.
Right. Oh my God, that's a great analogy. Now, what about there's a bunch of services that provide it. I know you've spoken about all of them, but you have OpenAI, you have Microsoft. Some have said that Microsoft or Google, everything's integrated in all your applications that might be more efficient. What's your quick take on that?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, this is very timely, right? We're just a couple hours, post launch for, Google's new Gemini Ultra, kind of their, it's called Gemini Advanced. So yeah, I think that's the long-term goal. I think right now, at least on the Google side, it's a little problematic. It's not working right now with all workspace accounts. So, even for me personally, I would love to get our team right on, to be able to use, as an example, Google's new Gemini across all the different products. But right now we can only access it on our personal account. So, I think they're still trying to work out some of the kinks, but, even when you look at Microsoft, right? Like I've been on Google and Apple products my whole life, literally. Well, not my whole life, sorry. It kind of stopped once I went to college because, yeah, I did used to build, as a Microsoft certified professional way back in the day when I was, I think, 16, in high school through a career program. But since then, I haven't used anything Microsoft. And I find myself more and more, it's like, all right, well, especially now, we were kind of waiting, at least for our team, until Google, Gemini. We were like, okay, is it going to finally work with our workspace, with our documents, with our Google Drive? And it's like, it still looks like it's not. So, we might even make the jump and, go to all Microsoft products. So you can still, even if you're on a Mac, right, you can still use their desktop programs and then use their Copilot Pro that will, it kind of shares that knowledge and can talk back and forth between the different, Microsoft programs on your desktop. So yeah, I think that's kind of what we're going to start to see in 2024 is, people, where you really had to used to go out of the way to use generative AI. You had to go log on to a specific generative AI website. It's changing, right? Pretty soon, once we all get that access to, all of our different apps, we're already starting to see it in Microsoft on the desktop, right? If you're using their Microsoft 365 Copilot, it's living on your desktop. If you're using Microsoft Copilot Pro, I'm sure Apple, once they release something, they might release it just for iPhones first, but I'm sure, at some point shortly thereafter, it's going to make its way to the desktop program. So, before we really had to go out of our way to use generative AI. And I think 2024 is when that starts to change. And generative AI is going to come to us. And you may not even really know that you're using it, right? But it's just going to integrate seamlessly into how you interact with your devices, right? Even with Edge AI, the next Apple, update will, allegedly have that baked in. The newest Samsung phones already have Gemini Nano, so it's already, it's generative AI on the actual phone, on the hardware. So yeah, it's generative AI is coming for us, not in a bad way, but it's coming to us, and we aren't going to have to seek it out. So that is going to be, I think, the new way that we interact with all technology.
Yeah, no, for sure. Um, and this has been an amazing conversation, Jordan. Thank you so much. And we usually, before we end, we like to get, just quick takes, right? Just one thing for folks. So, let us know one tip for people to learn and come up to speed on Gen AI.
Yeah, so I'd say one tip to learn or come up to speed on generative AI is don't get shiny object syndrome. I think a lot of people and companies are looking at, these long pilot programs, a 12-month pilot or a 2-year pilot, or they're looking at building their own large language model. Like, stop that, right? That's for 90% of companies, that's not the way you should be going. My biggest takeaway is see what you can learn today and tomorrow to start winning back time next week, right? And you have to commit to that. You have to go through the paces. It's like building a muscle, right? You have to practice it every single day, but focus on those areas where you're spending so much repetitive time and doing these mundane tasks. So, a lot of knowledge work tasks. Find those things that you're doing repeatedly in the area that you're doing it the most over and over. Find the best generative AI solution. Don't find the tool first. Go looking for a solution. Look to see where you're spending that most manual time. Find the best generative AI tool to help you win that time back.
Got it. I love that. Okay, one more. One tip for entrepreneurs to leverage AI to scale their business.
Don't worry about scaling. Right? It's the same concept, right? I know that sounds crazy, but hey, I know as an entrepreneur, and I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm very even here in Chicago, I'm tapped into the kind of that startup scene. Everyone is trying to think of generative AI as this huge thing. Like, don't think of it like, oh, how can we scale? Because I think when you think of like, oh, how can we use it to scale, you miss the most important and obvious things right in front of you because you're only looking at how to 10x, right? If you're only looking at AI on how to 10x, you might only have a 1% chance of doing it, but you are literally looking past the 90% likelihood that you can 2x, the 80% likelihood that you can 3x. So don't focus on scaling, focus on taking that next step, and that will propel you because generative AI allows us to travel at faster speeds than ever before. But don't worry about getting a rocket ship to the moon. Worry about getting from point A to point B much faster.
That's great. Great advice. All right. Lastly, we usually conclude with a poem or a saying. What do you want to share with us, Jordan?
All right. Well, I spent a lot of time putting together a podcast recently of 200 facts and tips and pieces of advice. So I actually used my podcast transcript and a little AI to summarize that all together into a little poem. All right. And I don't hate it. I actually kind of like it. Ready? All right. So here we go. In the realm of AI, business finds its way. Guidelines, training, transparency pave the way. Generative tools whisper, promise, and might. Start small, learn quick, and take flight.
I love it. And that was created through generative AI, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah, my technically it started with my words, but yes, generative AI made that based on a transcript of what I talked about.
I love it. I love it. Awesome. This has been great. Thank you so much, Jordan. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.